Hello and welcome back to Deep Sleep Creep's YouTube channel. Today we're going to be listening to 3 Valentine's Day horror stories, so sit back, relax, and let's go deep. This happened a little over 5 years ago. I was dating this guy I found on Hinge and we were hitting it off. He was cute, smart and funny, and he seemed to feel the same way about me too. Once Valentine's Day approached, he wanted to take me out to a nice fancy dinner and pay for it all, which I, of course, said yes to. I was about 19 and living with my parents at the time. He lived an hour away and wanted to pick me up, but I said no and rather take the train because I felt bad that he'd have to drive an hour to pick me up, then 30 minutes back to the restaurant. For additional context, the restaurant was 30 minutes between me and him, so it would have been out of his way to pick me up. He asked if I was okay taking the train and I said yes, since I've done it many times before. I was also on the west side of Chicago, and if you didn't know your way around, you could easily end up in a really bad area, and I didn't want to confuse and do that to him. Up until this point of my life, I was fairly used to being catcalled walking down the street. I'm a pretty natural redhead and have a slim yet short figure, so it's no surprise I'd stand out in the crowd. Sadly, I've experienced a lot of things women shouldn't have to go through, like men exposing themselves or men bumping into me from behind on packed trains and accidentally squeezing my butt. Basically, the usual amount of sexual harassment living in the city. Because of these experiences, not a lot phases me. I've grown immune and was able to tone out a lot of the catcalling, but that Valentine's Day night I experienced something so terrifying I never went on the train again. That night I hopped on the train to meet my man for Valentine's Day. Let's call him Jake. Jake was 20 and was sweet, nice and polite from the texts, so I was excited to meet him. He said he'd pick me up from the train stop so I wouldn't have to walk that far to the restaurant. As I was sitting in one of the train cars, a guy in a long black trench coat started staring at me. You know the black trench coat from the movie The Matrix? You're sort of like that, but with holes in it. I was afraid to look more, but it looked like they were bullet holes and not your typical deteriorating fabric holes. If that makes sense. If not, it doesn't matter, it was just another thing that I found odd about him despite the starring. With each stop he casually got closer and closer to me. I started freaking out and not knowing what to do, so I just kept my eyes to my phone and tried to block myself from looking at him. 15 minutes, I thought to myself. Come on, you can do it. 15 more minutes and I'll be safely with my boyfriend and hope he's not another creep. 20 minutes have passed and the guy got so close to me, he was now one seat over and just staring and admiring me. Again, I just tried putting my head down and act like he's not there. I didn't want us to meet eye contact again because I was worried it'll signal an invitation for him to talk to me. Until he tapped my shoulder and I quickly smacked his hand away from my shoulder. He held his hands up and went, Hey girl, I didn't mean to startle you." "Okay," I replied, still on edge and suspicious. He then proceeded to ask me, "I was just wondering, is your red hair natural? It's so beautiful." Annoyed, I said sure, trying to seem like I didn't want to talk to him. He still didn't take the hint and asked me about my freckles and what he called exotic green eyes. I was noticeably more annoyed at this point that I stood up, and so did he. Thankfully, the train stopped at my destination and I was hoping my date didn't stand me up so that this perv would just leave me alone. I said bye, and that this is my stop. He said, "How convenient, this is my stop too. Where you headed?" I lied and I said, "To the movies with my boyfriend." He was put off when I said boyfriend. He then goes, "Oh yeah? How long have you guys been together?" Getting fed up at this point, I said, "Long enough and bye," leaving the train car quickly. He followed hastily right behind me, and I was relieved to find my Hinge date, Jake, waiting for me. I ran into his arms and hugged him. I can tell I caught him by surprise. I told him to hug me back like you mean it because this creep wouldn't stop talking to me. He did just as I asked. I turned around and saw the creep walking off into the distance. I breathed a sigh of relief and told Jake everything that happened. Jake was shocked and said, "Well, that makes sense why that man looked at me like he was going to kill me." and tried laughing it off to lighten the mood. We then proceeded to have a nice evening, and I was finally able to enjoy myself after the crazy fiasco. It was past 10 p.m. and Jake asked if I wanted to do anything else tonight. I thought about it and remembered I had work the next day and said I should go to bed early. He seemed understanding, then asked if he could take me home. He said he didn't mind the drive, but as we were approaching the train station, I noticed there was no one in the train cars. I pointed this out to him and said that I should be safe since I didn't see the man. He joked and asked if it would be okay if he could give me a big hug goodbye, and I laughed and said sure. So after our hug we parted ways and I was sitting alone in the car. That was until 10 minutes later the train stopped again. Sadly, you may have guessed it, at this point it was the same man that bothered me from before. I was furious, scared and angry all at the same time. Has this creep been getting on and off this train hoping to see me, or was it a weird coincidence? The hairs that stood on the back of my neck said otherwise. His eyes lit up when he saw me and went over and said, "Hi, hot stuff, remember me?" I just stared at him with obvious disgust on my face. He winked at me and started harassing me some more, saying things like, "You're a very sexy redhead. You sure you're not a model? And I think I'm going to call you my strawberry shortcake." I rolled my eyes and he bursted out, "Don't you dare roll your eyes at me, you whore." I was shocked and just kept staring at him. Now that I think about it, he might have been on drugs or unstable in general. Not taking my eyes off of him, I counted down the minutes until my next stop arrived. He kept babbling about how pretty I am. Meanwhile, I was trying to plot my escape because there's no doubt he'll follow me. He tried following me before, so why wouldn't he follow me again? He then asked a question that I had to think fast on. He asked, "So I saw you with your boyfriend and I was wondering why he's not here. Why would he drop a pretty girl like you off on this disgusting train?" The best I could come up with is, he had an emergency work call that he had to get to but will meet me back at our house. I lied the best I could and kept it cool. The man goes, "Work call, huh? What does he do that would make him drop you off for work?" Now, before I get stupid and judgmental comments, I wanted to let you know I was panicking, and what I was about to say made sense in the moment. But I know a lot of people will tell me how dumb I am for saying this. Please let me know what I should have said. But what I did say was, he's a midwife assistant. A woman went into labor and he had to assist. The creep laughed so hard he dramatically fell to the ground. That was the perfect time I needed to get a couple of seconds head start as the train stopped at my stop. I jumped out of my seat at the last second and dashed out of the car. He quickly caught up to me pretty fast, sadly. Once he caught up to me, he started speaking to me like any other man trying to chat me up would do. I still couldn't shake the feeling of genuine fear I'd had since first locking eyes with him. This maniac spent the whole night trying to chase me down and talk to me. He asked if I needed someone to walk me home since there are a lot of creeps out here. How ironic he were to say that, I thought. I quickly and shortly said no. I said my boyfriend should be at the house by now. That's when he pulled up his shirt and exposed a long butcher knife. He said in a joking but sinister laughter that he'd fight my boyfriend for me. I did a quick laugh and said, "Oh, okay, bye," and kept walking down Cermak Street, which is luckily pretty busy still at this time of night. I knew I couldn't let him follow me to my parents' house, so when we approached an intersection I'd typically walk left towards my house. I instead went straight. I kept walking straight and kept going around the block. He walked alongside me for a while until he dropped back and followed me from a distance, and then eventually I couldn't see him anymore. I thought I would be relieved once I stopped seeing him, but as soon as I couldn't see him, my fear only intensified. I still walked around the block once before heading to my parents' home. I kept putting one foot in front of the other, and when I finally made it into my parents' home and locked the door behind me, I collapsed in a puddle of tears. That night I was still constantly looking outside my window to make sure he wasn't outside. Luckily I didn't see him the rest of the night and called and told my boyfriend what happened. He was upset that I didn't let him drive me home and said next time he's not taking no for an answer, and I agreed. From that day on, I stopped using the train and moved in with my boyfriend. It's been a couple of years since the incident, but I'm just glad I made it home safe and never saw that creep ever again. This was supposed to be a typical Valentine's Day like any other. My girlfriend, 22, and myself, male 24, planned a nice Valentine's Day dinner for my girlfriend of 5 years. High school sweethearts, we chose the same college and still stayed together. We both were excited to go on a nice date and then go to the movies after. She wanted to see a Valentine's Day chick flick and I loved her too much to say no, so we added it to the plan. I picked her up at her dorm around 7 p.m. She came out in a nice, sexy dress with beautiful red lipstick. I had a dozen red roses waiting for her on the passenger side of my car. She saw them and got so excited. I drove off and we chatted about our day and our professors. Typical stuff. Once we made it to the nice restaurant, I gave the valet my car keys and he drove off finding a parking spot for us. It was that fancy of a restaurant. We walked in, and not surprisingly, the place was packed. I noticed a drunk man standing at the bar, or his way of standing anyway. He was standing, sitting, standing, sitting. I tried not to pay too much attention to him. I went up to the hostess and told her my name. She looked down the list and said our table will be ready in 5 minutes. I nodded my head and we waited. While we were waiting, my girlfriend poked at my side. I looked at her and said, "What?" She whispered in my ear that that man at the bar has been staring at her since we arrived. I looked at him and once he saw me look at him, he turned away pretty quickly. It's important to note this man had on a dark green Rolex watch and had an interesting moustache that was hard to describe. This detail will come in handy later in the story. I bent to the side and told her not to worry. She nodded and we proceeded to sit down at our seats. We tried to brush it off and have a nice dinner. Unfortunately, the man kept gawking at my girl. She was even getting uncomfortable, but we kept trying to focus on the nice evening since it was an expensive dinner. Sadly, our attempts to ignore him pretty much failed when he walked over to our table and turned to my girlfriend and said, "Hey, I know you." She looked at him with such confusion. Even I was confused. This man looked around 50, so how could she know him unless it was a friend of her older relatives? She said, "No, I think you have the wrong person." He insists and goes, "No, I definitely do. Your name is Anna, right?" We were both stunned and stayed silent. Then he continued and said, "Yeah, I'm a friend of your dad's. We used to go to the bar together every Saturday." Hairs stood up at the back of my neck. Her dad died before she was born. I mean, it's logical. He could have had a friend, but we kept playing it off like he was still alive. We didn't want to provide him with any more information about her than he already knew. Knowing her name is more than enough information for this creep. "You know you two are a beautiful couple. What other plans do you have for the night?" I said nothing much, and we both excused ourselves to go to the bathroom so we could talk about it. They had this sort of big lobby before the bathroom at the restaurant. We discussed what to do. Anna still wanted to go to the movies and not let this creep ruin the evening, and I agreed. We just had to make sure we weren't being followed. So once we split and used the bathrooms, as I was doing my business, I felt eyes on me. I looked in the mirrors and noticed the man behind me staring at me. Sometimes I can be a hothead when I need to be. So I looked at him in the mirror and asked, "Do we have a problem?" He grinned some more and said, "I could definitely take you." I could see his eyes were dazed and watery like he was drinking too much. Plus he reeked off alcohol. He got closer to me, so I pushed him further so I could use the sinks to wash my hands. And that's when he grabbed my biceps and said, "You're built well, but I think I could still take you on." At this point I was furious and said in a loud and confrontational voice, "Oh, you think so, huh? Do we need to F around and find out?" After that, the man took his hands off of me and laughed and left. I quickly washed my hands and saw my girlfriend wasn't in the lobby yet. So I waited for her and told her we needed to hurry and leave now. She was confused but didn't question me until we were outside. Once I paid the bill and we walked outside, I told her what happened to me in the bathrooms. Disturbed, she said I should have told the employees what happened. I dismissed it and said he was drunk enough so they should be cutting him off at some point for him to leave. I asked her if she still wanted to go to the movies and she said yes. After we looked around and didn't see the man, I drove us to the movies. We got our popcorn and drinks and sat down. It was packed, and as we watched the movie I was getting bored. Like I said, it was a chick flick. I said I'd go but didn't promise her I'd like it. So I decided to look around, and that's when I saw the man that was at the restaurant. He had on the same dark green Rolex watch and the same moustache. By then I was panicking. Luckily the movie was about to end, so it gave me time to think if I should tell my girlfriend or tell her in the car. So I decided to play it off like I didn't see him. Once the movie was over, I grabbed my girlfriend's arm and told her we needed to rush out here now. She was concerned, but did as she was told because she trusts me and knows I wouldn't be alarmed like this if it wasn't for a good reason. We hurried to my car, and when I opened the door for her, I looked around for the man, and sure enough he was at the entrance of the movies looking for us. I ducked behind the cars. Luckily we were all the way in the back of the parking lot, so we were able to gain distance on him. I shut the door and sped off. I told my girlfriend everything that happened and she too was freaked out. I asked her what she wanted to do. She said at this point she'd rather go back to her dorm, and if we're still being followed, then go back to my place. So that's what we did. While I was driving, I constantly checked behind me. I had to make sure we weren't being followed. I drove around our college campus for a bit to make sure we were safe. Once I determined we weren't being followed and she felt safe enough, I dropped her off at her dorm and headed home. The next morning I got many alarming texts from my girlfriend to call her. So I did, and what she said sent shivers down my spine. She got a love note saying, "You were so beautiful in that dress. I enjoyed watching you. I'll be around when you need me. Happy Valentine's Day, love." I told her to keep it and build up evidence in case this gets out of hand. Ever since then it's been almost a year, and we still haven't seen any signs of him, luckily. We're hoping it was just a one-time thing. But as this Valentine's Day approaches, we're much more careful and on high alert for the green Rolex creep. My husband wanted to surprise me with a vacation to the Maldives for our anniversary, and it just so happened to fall on Valentine's Day. We were both excited. We packed our things a month earlier. We finally reached the Maldives that weekend with my husband, who was my fiancé at the time of this story. We were staying at one of the older hotels along the beach, and since they were almost full, we checked into a room with 2 single beds and a shared bathtub. Our room faced the sea and had large windows that were wide open during the night. The sheer curtains had a nice flow to them as the sea breeze blew into the room. Each bed was covered with several blankets as well as a quilt and coverlet tucked under the mattress. So when you were in bed, you were tucked in snug and warm from the night air. I remember feeling tired from a long but lovely day at the beach, sunbathing and swimming. After dinner, my fiancé and I went to our room, then we both fell into a deep sleep. I woke up during the night and had this unsettling feeling, not quite sure why. The room was quiet except for the drip from the faucet on the small sink in the room. I looked around the room and could see the curtains moving from the wind. The room was dimly lit as the moon was casting some light into the room. I looked over at my fiancé in the other single bed, who was soundly still asleep. Suddenly, that sensation people describe as frozen with or paralyzed with fear came over me. I also could not utter a sound. My heart was pounding fast and it was hard to get a single breath in as I saw the white, filmy figure of a woman emerge and approach my bed. I knew my fiancé was next to me, only a few feet away. I knew I was awake and not dreaming as every detail of the room was lit by the moonlight. I knew I just needed to scream and my fiancé would hear, but I couldn't get out a sound. I held onto the covers under my chin for dear life as the filmy white figure seemingly floated to the bottom of the bed, and I could feel the covers being pulled from the bottom of the bed and out from under the mattress. I felt I knew she or it wanted to hurt me, to smother me, but I still couldn't get a sound out. Finally, a small sound escaped from my throat, and I kept gasping and trying to scream till enough came out that my fiancé heard me and jumped out of bed and rushed over to my side. The filmy figure disappeared, but I was shaking and crying from fright. My fiancé said that it was just a bad dream, and I almost believed him till I saw all the covers from my bed lying in a heap at the bottom of the bed, lying on top of them. It is impossible to pull them out from under the mattress beneath yourself while they are tucked under it. We have tried over and over again, even though it was a small single bed for the two of us. We were both tired and decided we'll try to figure it out in the morning, and went to sleep. I slept in the same bed as my fiancé the rest of the night. The next morning I got ready for breakfast, but as I was putting lotion on my legs, I noticed subtle scratch marks, but it was enough to get me to hyperventilate. My then fiancé rushed over, and he was stunned too. He tried to rationalize it and said maybe I brushed up against something in the water that I didn't notice. I nodded and was willing to accept any logical explanation at this point. Truth be told, I never believed in ghosts, so him saying that was enough to put me a little bit at ease. We agreed that that's what it was and headed to breakfast. We sat with another couple since it was a Valentine's Day special. There were a lot of them, and I told my story about the previous night. Most everyone who heard it believed it really happened, and they said the hotel was haunted by a big fire that broke out at the turn of the century. Someone said, maybe the filmy white ghost may have pulled the covers from your bed because she thought your bed or you were on fire. Maybe. To this day, all I know is I know what I saw and how it felt, and I know I was in the presence of something inhuman.